I won't ask for your love, she said. Just don't forget me when it's over. Wild West story, the gunshot echoed across the canyon before Jake Carter even saw who fired it. He dove behind a boulder as wood splintered from the wagon beside him. 3 riders came hard over the ridge, their horses kicking up dust that burned orange in the setting sun. He'd been riding alone for 2 weeks trying to forget her face, and now someone wanted him dead. Jake pulled his revolver and fired twice toward the riders. One man jerked sideways in his saddle but held on. They scattered into the rocks above him. He checked his ammunition. 4 bullets left. His horse had bolted at the first shot, and now he was pinned down in hostile territory with night coming fast. "Carter," a voice called from the rocks. "Danny wants his money." Jake's jaw tightened. Danny Bishop. He should have known. 3 months ago, he'd won Bishop's ranch in a card game in Silver Ridge. The game was clean, but Bishop never believed it. Now Bishop had sent hired guns after him. "Tell Danny the game was fair," Jake shouted back. "Danny don't care about fair. He wants blood or money. Your choice." Jake looked at the canyon walls rising on both sides. No escape route except back the way he came, and they had that covered. The sun dropped lower. Shadows stretched across the rocks like dark fingers reaching for him. He thought about Claire again. Her words still burned in his memory from that last night in Silver Ridge. "I won't ask for your love," she said. "Just don't forget me when it's over." She was Bishop's sister. That's what made everything complicated. Jake had won the ranch from her brother and lost his heart to her the same week. Then he'd ridden out before things got worse. Another bullet ricocheted off the boulder near his head. He counted 3 shooters in the rocks. They were spreading out trying to flank him. He fired once toward movement on his left. Someone cursed. "You got lucky, Carter," the voice called. "But you're down to 3 bullets now. We can wait all night." Jake knew they were right. He pressed his back against the boulder and felt the still warm stone through his shirt. His throat was dry. His canteen had been on his horse. He was thinking about making a run for the narrow gap in the rocks when he heard new hoofbeats coming fast from the north. The shooters heard it too. Their fire stopped. Everyone waited. Jake risked a look around the boulder. A single rider came over the rise, moving fast on a paint horse. Even at distance, he recognized the way she sat in the saddle. Claire. She rode straight into the middle of the situation without slowing. Her red hair flew behind her like a banner. She had a rifle across her lap. The 3 gunmen came out of the rocks confused. "Miss Bishop," one of them said. "Your brother sent us to—" "I know what my brother sent you to do," Claire cut him off. Her voice carried clearly in the canyon. "And I'm telling you to ride out." "But Danny said—" "I don't care what Danny said. This is between him and Carter. Not you hired guns. You ride out or I ride back to Silver Ridge and tell everyone Danny Bishop is too scared to face one man himself." The 3 men looked at each other. Their horses shifted nervously. Claire kept her rifle ready. Jake stayed behind his boulder watching everything unfold. "Your brother won't like this," the lead gunman finally said. "My brother doesn't like a lot of things. That's his problem." Claire's eyes were hard as flint. "You have 10 seconds to decide if you want to die for Danny Bishop's pride." The men exchanged looks again. Then slowly they turned their horses and rode back over the ridge. Claire watched until they disappeared. Then she turned her paint horse toward Jake's boulder. He stood up slowly, his revolver still in his hand. She rode closer and stopped 10 feet away. Her green eyes studied him in the fading light. 3 months apart, and she looked even more beautiful than he remembered. Also more dangerous. "You came back," Jake said. "I heard Danny sent men after you. Figured you might need help." "I had it handled." "Sure you did." "With 4 bullets against 3 guns." She swung down from her horse. "Danny knows about us." "Knew it before you left. That's why he's so angry." "Not just about the ranch." Jake holstered his gun. "Claire, I left because staying would have started a war. You left because you were scared." She walked closer. "Scared of what you felt. Scared of what it meant. Scared that loving me meant you'd have to stay in one place." He couldn't argue because she was right. All his life he'd been moving from town to town, never staying, never letting anyone get close. Then Claire happened and everything changed. It terrified him more than any gunfight. "Danny's not going to stop," Claire said. "He'll send more men, better men. Next time I might not hear about it in time. So what do you want me to do?" She stepped close enough that he could smell sage and leather on her clothes. "Stop running. Face him. Face me." Jake looked into her eyes and saw everything he'd been running from. Commitment. Home. The setting sun painted her face in gold and shadow. He remembered her words from 3 months ago. Just don't forget me when it's over. It's not over, he said quietly. It's just starting. She touched his face gently. But you have to choose, Jake. Keep running and Danny will hunt you forever. Or come back with me and end this. He knew she was right. He also knew going back to Silver Ridge meant facing Bishop and probably drawing on him. It meant choosing Claire over his freedom. It meant everything changing. The old Jake Carter would already be riding for the next territory, but something had shifted inside him during these 3 months. Maybe it happened when he realized running didn't make him forget her. Maybe it happened just now when she rode into danger to save him. All right, he said. I'll come back. Claire smiled for the first time. Danny's at the ranch tomorrow. We settle this then. They found Jake's horse grazing in a meadow nearby. They made camp under the stars without talking much. Claire built a small fire while Jake unsaddled both horses. He kept thinking about tomorrow and what it would mean. Bishop was fast with a gun, maybe faster than Jake. But it wasn't the gunfight that scared him anymore. It was what came after. It was the life Claire was offering him if he survived. It was everything he'd never let himself want. Claire sat across the fire watching him with those green eyes that saw right through him. You're thinking too much, she said. Probably. Tomorrow will come whether you worry or not. I know. She stood and walked around the fire to sit beside him. She leaned her head against his shoulder. I won't ask for your love, she said again. Just don't forget me when it's over. I could never forget you, Claire. That's the problem. That's always been the problem. They sat like that watching the fire burn down to embers while the stars wheeled overhead. Tomorrow would bring Danny Bishop and probably violence, but tonight Jake Carter let himself imagine a different kind of future, one where he stayed in one place, one where Claire Bishop waited for him to come home, one where he finally stopped running. The next morning they rode toward Silver Ridge under a sky so blue it hurt to look at. Jake's stomach was tight, but his hands were steady. He'd faced death before. This time felt different because this time he had something to lose. Claire rode beside him, silent and determined. She had put on a blue dress that morning and tied her hair back. She looked like she was heading to church instead of a showdown. Silver Ridge appeared on the horizon around noon. The town looked exactly how Jake remembered it. Main Street, lined with false front buildings. The saloon on the corner, the hotel where he'd stayed those weeks in the spring. He could almost see himself walking those boardwalks like a ghost. Back then he'd been free. No attachments. No complications. Now everything was different. Danny will be at the ranch, Claire said. We should go straight there. Jake nodded. They turned their horses north toward the Bishop property. The ranch sat 3 miles outside town in a valley with good water and grassland rolling to the mountains. It was a fine piece of land, worth fighting for. Jake had won it in that card game fair and square, but he'd never actually claimed it. He'd planned to sign it over to Claire and ride out. Then he'd met her properly, and everything got complicated. They rode up the long drive toward the main house. Jake saw men working in the corrals who stopped to watch them pass. The house was 2 stories tall with a wide porch. Danny Bishop stood on that porch waiting. He was younger than Jake expected, maybe 25 with blonde hair and his sister's green eyes. He wore a gun on his hip and his hand rested near it. You got some nerve coming back here, Danny called out as they approached. Jake and Claire dismounted. Jake kept his hands visible and away from his gun. I came to settle things, he said. Only thing to settle is you leaving this territory. Danny came down the porch steps. You cheated me out of my ranch and then you put hands on my sister. The game was clean and you know it, Jake replied. And Claire makes her own choices. Danny, stop this, Claire said. I came here of my own free will. What's between Jake and me is none of your business. Everything about this family is my business, Danny snapped. Pa left me in charge. He'd be ashamed if he saw you chasing after some drifter. Claire's face went red, but her voice stayed controlled. Pa would be ashamed you sent hired guns after an unarmed man. Danny looked surprised. How did you... I know everything that happens in this town, brother, including your debts and your drinking and your gambling. You didn't lose this ranch in one card game. You've been losing it piece by piece for 2 years. Jake just happened to win the final piece. Now Danny's face flushed. You don't know what you're talking about. I know exactly what I'm talking about. I've been covering for you since Pa died. Paying your debts. Lying to folks in town about why the ranch is struggling. But I'm done protecting you from yourself. Jake watched the siblings face each other. This was more than just him and the ranch. This was years of family conflict boiling over. Danny's hand moved closer to his gun. "Don't," Jake said quietly. "I didn't come here to kill you, Bishop." "Then why did you come?" "To give you back the ranch." Jake reached slowly into his coat and pulled out a folded paper. "This is the deed. Signed over to Claire Bishop. I never wanted your land. I just wanted to play cards." Danny stared at the paper. "What's the catch?" "No catch. The ranch goes to Claire. She can do with it whatever she wants. Give it back to you. Sell it. I don't care." Claire looked at Jake, surprised. He hadn't told her about this. He'd had the papers drawn up in the last town before those gunmen found him. He'd planned to send them to her. Now he could give them directly. "And what do you get?" Danny asked suspiciously. "I get to walk away clean," Jake said. "No more bounty on my head. No more hired guns. We're square." Danny's hand finally moved away from his gun. He took the deed from Jake and read it. His face showed confusion, then something like shame. "I don't understand. You won this fair?" "Sometimes winning isn't the point," Jake replied. He looked at Claire. "Sometimes there are more important things." Claire took the deed from her brother and read it herself. Her eyes got shiny, but she didn't cry. "You did this before those men came after you. Did it the day after I left Silver Ridge. Took a while for the lawyer to make it legal. So you were always planning to give it back?" "I told you. I never wanted the land. I just wanted to play cards." He paused. "And maybe get to know Danny Bishop's sister a little better." Danny looked between them, clearly still processing everything. "So you're really not after the ranch?" "Never was. And you really care about Claire. More than I've cared about anything in a long time." Danny was quiet for a moment. Then he nodded slowly. "All right, but Carter, if you hurt my sister, I'll hunt you to the end of the earth." "Fair enough," Jake said. Danny went back into the house, leaving Jake and Claire standing in the yard. Ranch hands had gathered to watch the confrontation, but now they drifted back to work. Claire still held the deed in her hands. "You keep surprising me," she said finally. "I'm full of surprises. What happens now?" Jake looked around at the ranch, the mountains rising behind it, the good grazing land, the solid house. Everything a man could want, everything he'd spent his whole life avoiding. That depends on what? On whether you'd consider hiring a ranch hand. "I don't know much about cattle, but I learned fast." Claire smiled that smile that had captured him months ago. "I might have a position available, room and board included. Sounds like a good deal." "There's just one condition," she said, stepping closer. "What's that?" "No running when things get hard. No leaving in the middle of the night. You stay and build something with me." Jake felt his heart pound. This was it, the moment he chose between freedom and home. Between moving and staying, between being alone and being with her. He thought about all the towns he'd ridden through, all the places he'd left behind, all the people who never knew his name. Then he thought about Claire riding into danger to save him, about her standing up to her brother, about her offering him something he'd never let himself imagine. "I'll stay," he said. She kissed him right there in the yard, with ranch hands watching, and her brother probably glaring from the window. Jake kissed her back and felt something inside him finally settle, like he'd been riding toward this moment his whole life without knowing it. When they broke apart, Claire was smiling. "Welcome home, Jake Carter." "Home," he repeated. The word felt strange and right at the same time. They spent the afternoon going over ranch business with Danny. Turned out the younger Bishop wasn't as bad as Jake thought. He was just young and overwhelmed, trying to run a ranch he wasn't ready for. Claire had been doing most of the real work while letting Danny pretend to be in charge. Now with Jake there, they could figure out how to make it work together. By evening, they'd made a plan. Danny would stay on as foreman. Claire would handle the books and accounts. Jake would work the land and learn the cattle business. They'd be partners, equal shares. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start. That night, Jake stood on the porch of the ranch house, watching the sun set over the valley. Claire came out and stood beside him. She didn't say anything, just took his hand. They watched the sky turn from gold to orange to purple together. "You really staying?" she asked quietly. "I'm really staying. Not gonna run when you get the itch to see new places." "I might get the itch," he admitted, "but I'm not going to run. Made you a promise." She squeezed his hand. "I won't ask for your love. Just don't forget me when it's over. Claire, I love you. Have since that first week. That's why I ran." I wasn't ready for what that meant. And now I'm ready to find out. They stood there as stars began appearing in the darkening sky. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled. Cattle lowed in the fields. The ranch settled into evening quiet. Jake felt something he'd never felt before. Peace. Like he'd finally found where he belonged. The next weeks fell into a rhythm. Jake woke before dawn to help with the cattle. He learned about branding and breeding and which grass grew best in which season. His hands got rough and his back got sore, but he kept working. Claire taught him about ranch accounts and contracts with buyers. Danny showed him how to spot a sick cow and repair fence line. Slowly, Jake stopped being a drifter and started being a rancher. The town of Silver Ridge gradually accepted his presence, at first folks whispered when he walked by. The gambler who won the Bishop Ranch. The drifter who took up with Claire Bishop. But Jake kept his head down and did his work. He paid his bills. He helped neighbors when they needed it. He showed up to church on Sundays with Claire on his arm. Eventually, people stopped whispering. He still thought about the open road sometimes. Late at night, he'd remember the freedom of riding with no destination, going where he wanted, when he wanted, answering to nobody. Those thoughts came less often as time passed, but they never fully disappeared. Claire seemed to know when he was thinking about leaving. She never said anything, just touched his hand or smiled at him, and the thoughts would fade. 3 months after coming back to Silver Ridge, Jake was riding fence line on the southern property when he spotted riders approaching. His hand went to his gun by instinct, but these weren't gunmen. They were lawmen. 2 federal marshals on official business. Jake rode to meet them, his heart racing. Had someone accused him of cheating? Had Danny changed his mind and pressed charges? The marshals looked serious as they approached. Jake Carter, the older one said. That's me. I'm Marshal William Ross. This is Deputy Frank Owens. We need to ask you some questions about a robbery in Red Bluff. Jake's stomach dropped. Red Bluff was 2 territories over. He'd passed through there years ago. What kind of robbery? Bank robbery. 3 men hit the Red Bluff Bank 6 months ago. One of them matches your description. Dark hair. Tall. Good with cards. I've never robbed a bank in my life, Jake said firmly. We have a witness who says otherwise, says you were drinking with the Johnson brothers the night before the robbery. Says you rode out together the next morning. Jake's mind raced. 6 months ago, he'd been in Red Bluff briefly. He had played cards with some men named Johnson. But he'd ridden out alone heading east. He certainly hadn't robbed any banks. I played cards with some men, Jake admitted, but I left town alone. Went east toward Silver Ridge. I've been here since spring. Can anyone verify that? Whole town can verify it. I've been working the Bishop Ranch since May. The marshals exchanged looks. We still need you to come with us. Sort this out proper. How long will that take? Few weeks, maybe? Depends on what the witnesses say. Jake thought about Claire, about the ranch, about the life he'd just started building. If he rode off with these marshals, he might be gone for months. Or worse, if the witness was convincing, he might hang for a crime he didn't commit. But if he ran now, he'd prove he was guilty. He'd lose everything, including Claire's trust. All right, he said finally. But I need to tell Claire Bishop first. I'm working her ranch. The marshals agreed to ride with him back to the main house. Claire was on the porch when they arrived. Her face went pale when she saw the badges. What's happening? She demanded. They think I robbed a bank in Red Bluff, Jake explained. I didn't, but they need me to come answer questions. Absolutely not. You're not going anywhere with them. Claire, I have to. If I run, it proves I'm guilty. You're not guilty. You were here in spring. Everyone knows that. I was in Red Bluff 6 months ago. They have a witness. I have to clear my name. Claire looked at the marshals. How long will you keep him? A few weeks at most, Marshal Ross said. If his story checks out, he'll be free to go. And if it doesn't, the marshal didn't answer. He didn't have to. They all knew what happened to bank robbers. Claire's eyes filled with tears, but she blinked them back. She stepped close to Jake. Don't forget me, she whispered.
Never, he promised.
He kissed her once, then mounted his horse. The marshals led him away from the ranch. Jake looked back once and saw Claire standing on the porch watching him go. His heart ached, but he kept riding. This was the test. Whether he was really a changed man or still the same drifter running from trouble. They rode for 3 days to reach Red Bluff. The town was bigger than Jake remembered. The marshal locked him in a cell while they gathered witnesses. Jake spent 2 nights in that cell thinking about Claire and the ranch and whether he'd ever see them again. The Johnson brothers had been caught right after the robbery. They'd been hanged already. Now, someone was trying to pin Jake as the third man. On the third day, Marshal Ross brought a man to identify Jake. The man was maybe 40 with a scarred face and nervous eyes. C stared at Jake through the bars. That him? Ross asked. The man squinted. Could be. I saw him drinking with the Johnsons. But is it him? I think so. Yeah, that's the man. Jake's blood ran cold. The witness was lying or mistaken. Either way, Jake was in serious trouble. Ross locked him back in the cell and left. Jake sat on the hard bunk, trying to figure a way out. He could break out. He'd done it before, but that would make him a fugitive. He'd never be able to go back to Silver Ridge, never see Claire again. 2 more days passed. Jake was losing hope when Marshal Ross returned with new information. We found someone who can verify your story, he said. Stage driver remembers you riding east from Red Bluff alone the morning of the robbery. Timing don't match up. You couldn't have hit the bank and made it to where he saw you. Relief flooded through Jake, so I'm free. Not yet. We still got the witness saying you were with the Johnsons. He's lying or confused. Probably. But we need to be sure. Ross questioned Jake for hours about Red Bluff and the Johnsons and where he'd been. Jake told the truth about everything. He'd been drifting, playing cards in different towns. He'd played with the Johnsons once, then moved on. He never saw them again. Ross seemed to believe him, but was cautious. On the 7th day, Ross came back with better news. Found another witness. Bartender remembers the Johnsons drinking with a different man, shorter than you, red hair. The first witness was covering for someone else. You're clear, Carter? Jake nearly collapsed with relief. I can go. You can go. Sorry for the trouble. Jake didn't waste time. He collected his horse and gear and started riding hard towards Silver Ridge. It took him 2 days pushing his horse to the limit. He rode into the ranch just after dawn. Claire was in the yard feeding chickens. She dropped the bucket when she saw him. They met halfway across the yard. She threw her arms around him. He held her tight, breathing in the scent of her hair. I'm sorry, he said. I'm so sorry you came back, she said. Tears ran down her face. You actually came back. Told you I would. Told you I'm not running anymore. They stood there, holding each other while the sun rose over the valley. Danny came out of the house and saw them. He nodded at Jake. Acceptance. Maybe even respect. Jake had proven himself. He'd face trouble instead of running. He'd come back like he promised. That evening, Jake and Claire sat on the porch watching the sunset again. It had become their ritual, their time together at the end of each day. Claire leaned against him. I thought I lost you, she said quietly. You'll never lose me. You promise. I promise. He turned to face her. Claire Bishop, I love you. I want to marry you. I want to build this ranch with you. I want to spend every day for the rest of my life right here beside you. She smiled through fresh tears. I don't stop. That sounds like a man who's finally stopped running. I'm done running. This is where I belong, with you. They kissed as the sun dipped below the horizon. Somewhere cattle lowed, horses whinnied in the corrals. The ranch breathed around them, peaceful and alive. Jake thought about all the places he'd been and all the places he'd never go. He thought about the open road and endless horizons. And he realized he didn't miss any of it. Everything he needed was right here. The next months brought their own challenges. Running a ranch was harder than Jake imagined. There were droughts and sick cattle and fence breaks and 100 other problems. But Jake faced each one alongside Claire and Danny. They worked together like a real family. The ranch started thriving again. Jake married Claire in the Silver Ridge Church that October. Half the town attended. It was a simple ceremony. Claire wore a white dress her mother had worn. Jake wore his best suit. Danny stood beside him as best man. When the preacher asked if he'd take Claire as his wife, Jake said, I do, without hesitation. Claire's eyes were bright when she said the same. They celebrated at the ranch with food and music and dancing. Jake had never felt happier. He danced with his wife under the stars and couldn't believe this was his life now. Settled. Married. Home. Everything he'd always avoided. Everything he now realized he'd always wanted. Later that night, after the guests left, Jake and Claire stood on their porch. Their porch. their home. Claire rested her head on his shoulder. "I won't ask for your love," she said with a smile. "You don't have to ask," Jake replied. "You've always had it, and you won't forget me when it's over. It's never going to be over." She looked up at him. No. The house was warm and welcoming. Their life stretched ahead of them, full of possibility. Jake had finally found what he'd been searching for all those years on the road. He'd found home. He'd found love. He'd found Claire. And he was never letting go. Years later, Jake would think back on that time, on the gunfight that never happened, on the woman who saved him, on the choice he made to stay instead of run. He'd think about how close he came to losing everything, how one decision changed his entire life. The ranch prospered under their management. Jake became known as a fair and honest rancher. Claire's business sense kept them profitable through hard times. Danny grew into a capable foreman and eventually married a girl from town. They had children who called Jake Uncle and ran wild through the ranch fields. Jake and Claire had children too, 2 boys and a girl. Jake taught them to ride and rope and read the weather. Claire taught them numbers and letters and kindness. They grew up knowing their father had been a drifter before he met their mother. They heard the story many times, how he'd won a ranch in a card game, how their mother rode into danger to save him, how he chose to stay and build something instead of running. Sometimes Jake still got the itch, the urge to saddle up and ride toward the horizon. But it always passed, because every time he thought about leaving, he remembered Claire's words. "Just don't forget me when it's over." And he remembered his promise. "I'll never forget you. I'll never leave." He kept that promise every day for the rest of his life. On his 60th birthday, Jake stood on the porch of the ranch house watching another sunset. Claire stood beside him like always. Their hands were wrinkled now. Their hair was gray, but they still watched the sunset together every evening. Still held hands. Still loved each other like they had that first spring. "You ever regret staying?" Claire asked. She asked him this sometimes, even after all these years. "Not once," Jake said, and he meant it. "You saved my life that day in the canyon. You saved your own life. I just gave you a reason to try. A home. A family. A purpose. I was nothing before you." "You were never nothing, Jake Carter. You just didn't know what you were looking for." "And now I know. What's that?" He pulled her close. "I was looking for you. Always you." The sun set over the valley they'd built together, the ranch they'd saved, the life they'd created. Jake had traveled thousands of miles before finding this place, this woman, this peace, and he'd stayed for 50 years and counting. He'd finally stopped running, because Claire Bishop had given him something worth staying for, something worth fighting for, something worth everything. As darkness fell over the valley, Jake and Claire went inside their home. The house was full of photographs and memories. Grandchildren would visit tomorrow. The ranch would need tending. Life would continue its steady rhythm. But tonight was just for them, like every night had been. Just Jake and Claire and the promise he'd kept, the promise to stay, the promise to love, the promise to never forget. And he never did. The end came peacefully for Jake Carter many years later. He died in his sleep with Claire holding his hand. He was 83 years old and had lived in Silver Ridge for nearly 60 years. The entire town attended his funeral. His children and grandchildren gathered at the ranch to remember him. They told stories about Jake the Drifter, who became Jake the Rancher, about the man who won a ranch in a card game and found love with the owner's sister, about the father and grandfather who taught them about hard work and keeping promises, about the man who chose to stay when he could have run. Claire lived another 5 years after Jake passed. She stayed on the ranch their children helped run. She watched sunsets from the porch alone now, but she always felt Jake beside her. Every evening she'd remember his promise. "I'll never forget you. I'll never leave." And she knew he'd kept it, right up until the end. When Claire died at 88, she was buried next to Jake on a hillside, overlooking the ranch. Their children planted wildflowers there. The stone was simple. Jake Carter, beloved husband and father, and Claire Carter, beloved wife and mother. Beneath both names was carved a single line: "They stopped running and found home." The ranch stayed in the family for generations. Jake and Claire's grandchildren worked the land their grandparents had saved. The story of how it all started became family legend, told and retold around dinner tables and campfires. The drifter and the rancher's daughter, the card game and the gunfight that never happened, The woman who rode into danger. The man who chose to stay. And always, always the words Claire had spoken that first night. I won't ask for your love. Just don't forget me when it's over. Jake Carter had never forgotten, not for a single day of his long and happy life. He'd loved Claire Bishop from that first spring until his last breath, and beyond. Because some promises are worth keeping, some loves are worth staying for. And sometimes the greatest adventure isn't riding toward the horizon. Sometimes it's choosing to stay in one place with one person and building something that lasts. Jake had learned that lesson the hard way, but once he learned it, he never forgot. He'd spent his youth searching for something he couldn't name, and then one day in Silver Ridge he found it. He found Claire. He found home. He found himself. The ranch still stands today if you know where to look. A few hours north of Silver Ridge in a valley with good water and grassland rolling to the mountains. It's been subdivided over the years. Different families work different sections, but the main house is still there. The porch where Jake and Claire watched sunsets. The corrals where they worked cattle. The land they loved. And if you visit on a quiet evening when the wind blows just right, some folks say you can still see them. Two figures standing on that porch holding hands, watching the sun go down. The drifter who found his home. The woman who gave him a reason to stay. Together forever in the place they built. It's probably just a story. Probably just the wind and shadows playing tricks. But then again, maybe some loves are strong enough to echo through time. Maybe some promises last beyond death. Maybe Jake and Claire Carter are still there keeping watch over the land they saved and the life they created. Either way, their story lives on, passed down through generations. A reminder that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is stop running. That sometimes love means choosing to stay even when leaving seems easier. That sometimes home isn't a place you're born but a place you choose. Jake Carter chose Claire Bishop. And in choosing her, he chose everything else. Family. Roots. Peace. He traded his freedom for belonging, and never regretted it for a moment, because Claire had asked him for only one thing. Don't forget me when it's over. And Jake had given her everything. His heart, his life, his future. Every sunrise and sunset for 60 years, every moment between. He never forgot her. Not once. Not ever. And that made all the difference.